Hello, welcome back once again to Entertainment ReCast, the podcast offshoot of our YouTube channel, Entertainment Rebooted. In what may not surprise anybody, I appear to be joined by my mysterious co-host, DJ. Say hi, DJ.
Hello.
Today, DJ, we are going to be talking about movies, obviously, but specifically multi-part movies, or rather ones that should have been multiple parts or even a standalone series, either a TV series or even a movie saga, if you will.
Right.
We have seen quite a few multiple part films recently. Obviously, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, the last Hunger Games book was split into two. In the last year alone, we've had Dune, Rebel Moon, Mission Impossible, Dead Reckoning, and even Fast X is technically part one. I wonder how they're going to title Fast X Part 2.
Fast 10-2. It's definitely not Final Fantasy.
Right. So,
and a big one was Into the Spider-Verse.
yeah, I totally forgot about that one.
Yeah,
but,
where it's a 3-part, but the first one stands alone, and then the second one is just leads right into the next one.
Yeah. So we've had movies that are multiple parts, but on top of that, we're also seeing kind of like traditionally what people would consider a film, quote unquote film character being put into like a series. We have the Jack Ryan series, we have the Jack Reacher series, we have the Jack Obi-Wan Kenobi series. Because everybody has to be named Jack.
Obi-Wan Kenobi series.
So let's move into our discussion here. What is a film that you believe should have been multiple parts, and what ones would you have, or which ones would have been a great series? We'll also open it up to the counterpoint of what should not have been multiple
Well,
parts.
I'm gonna start easy and go. I'm gonna remember the name of the film now. Percy Jackson.
Okay. Lightning Thief.
Yeah, Thief. They made it a film, and it kind of follows it, but there's a lot that goes on in there that's hard to get. This is actually part of the problem I have. We talked about this in our adaptations video a little bit. Like, books to film is kind of tough sometimes.
Yeah.
Because books give a lot of development to characters. They take over time. There's just some books that don't. Some books do make good films because they're concise, especially ones that are a lot of world building.
Well,
Sci-fi, especially
books.
because you can show. So a lot of the book is just shown, and then you can focus on characters.
Oh yeah, when it's environmentally written, or if it's a kid's book, like think about like Because of Winn-Dixie makes sense to make into a movie.
Right. BFG. What is it called? Princess Terabithia.
Yeah.
Works fine as a film because everything that happens in the book that matters can be put in the film really easily.
Yeah, because it's a short enough book that
Percy Jackson has so much world building that's dialogue based. Mm-hmm. A lot of characters.
Yeah.
That are important that show up. The film doesn't really do it justice, and I watched the original film and I've watched the series. The series is significantly better. It actually has a few issues with it too, but as an adaptation, it made a much better series. Another one is, I'm going to name 3 right in a row that have been made films, failed, and were made into so bear with me. But another one is His Dark Materials. I actually watched Golden Compass in theaters. I was like, oh, that was really fun. Not realizing it was His Dark Materials. I had read the book, but it was different enough that I didn't really actually put the 2 and 2 together at first. And I was like, oh, that was what that was supposed to be. I was like, it seemed familiar, but not. I was like, the whole, like, I get the characters. I figured it out. Like, I didn't actually figure it out after I figured out what I was watching it, but I didn't really put 2 and together like immediately because I'd read the books like a few years before I watched the film, so it wasn't fresh in my mind. And I was like, oh, and I was like, this like misses the point entirely. His Dark Materials has a lot of background character, hundreds of like just tons of world building, lots of side characters. It's like an anime level of just tons of stuff.
Yeah.
Not a good film. It's just too much.
Yeah.
The other one is Song of Ice and Fire. They approached him. It was like, hey, we want to make this into a movie. And it's like, he's like, no, make it a series. Good freaking call. Too many characters, too much going on. Very difficult.
Yeah.
Those are all ones that make way better series than films. Or multi-part films. Like you can't, the first His Dark Materials book, Golden Compass, couldn't have been one film. It would have to be 2 films.
Yeah. Well, and that's kind of a thing that it seems to be a trend when it comes to book to film adaptations. Like, they should be given more time to air out. They should be at least multiple parts. I mean, one that comes to my head immediately, Fifth Wave. Fifth Wave needed to have been either a series that was a 1-season series, and I'm just
like talking, a mini series or a special.
Yeah, and I'm just talking the first book. The first book should have been either its own little mini season, or it should have at least been 2 parts.
Yeah.
Because when you try to condense a book like that, so it's like a 500-page book. When you try to take a 500-page book and condense it into 1.5 hour movie, you're going to miss so much that starts feeling like any other teen dystopian movie.
Right.
Whereas the Fifth Wave, I actually really, really loved that book series. And it's because it was unique enough. It was different enough. And it's because all of that world building, all of the things that are going on that make the world what it is and the book as good as it is almost entirely internal.
Right.
You have to have time to let her air things out with her internal monologue. And you can't fit 500 pages of material that, it's 500 pages, but it doesn't necessarily ramble too much.
Right.
You can't fit all that into an hour and a half or 2 hours even. You need at least 2 parts.
Right. Another one that we've talked a lot about is Harry Potter.
Yeah.
Would have greatly benefited from having, yes, technically it's a multi-part series, but each film covers a single book. Yeah. And some of those books would have benefited from multiple films. It would have been way better because they didn't do a second part until the 7th one.
Yeah.
And it threw everybody off. But it would have been better had they done like Goblet of Fire, part 1 and 2.
Yeah.
At least book 1, 2, and 3 worked fine to film.
Well, they were short enough and they were pretty straightforward enough that you could kind of get everything that.
And it's very young adult fiction. But it gets more depth through 4, 5, and 6. Get really intense. If you even look at the books, like the thickness alone tells you what you need to see.
Well, it's literally sitting on the back shelf. It's covered by Frankenstein right now, but I have them on the shelf.
Yeah.
Literally, it goes like little, kind of little, a little bigger, huge, massive. Me.
Yeah, 4 is just insane. Now, part of our problem with 4 is there's a lot of like side stuff that doesn't go anywhere. But even then, if you take just the important stuff, they cut out so much of that into the film. That could have Goblet of Fire should have been 2 parts.
It should have been.
The book 6 was okay as one. But what I actually feel like what they should have done is books 4, 5, and 6 should have basically been 4 movies across the 3 of them, maybe even 5 across those 3 books. There's just so much that happens there. The 7th one, it was the weirdest one to pick 2 parts to start with because 4 and 5 have way more content than that one has.
Well, and also it's a lot of world building. It's a lot of interesting things that are going on. You have a lot of important characters that show up in the 7th movie that were introduced in the 5th movie, and they talk about things that happened in the 5th movie or in the 5th book that they didn't put in the movie.
Yes. And you have whole characters that show up way later. Luna Lovegood doesn't show up until the 5th film. Yeah. She shows up in, I think, book 3 originally. Like, you have people that don't show up until way later that should have shown up earlier because they matter to story elements. Well, Luna Lovegood doesn't matter really until this moment, except for she has a major plot in the 7th film. And if you didn't know that she showed up earlier than that, you wouldn't know why they care about her so much.
Well, yeah.
Didn't they just meet her?
Well, and the thing that kind of is that I think caused that issue is that if you were reading the books at the same time that the movies were coming out, the 7th book came out, I think, when the 3rd or 4th book was out.
The
No,
first
sorry, other way around.
the
Sorry,
first film the first film came out when they were before book 4 was dropped.
Exactly. And so book 7 didn't drop until, what was it, 2008? Was that when Deathly Hallows came out? 2007?
I can't remember. She was dropping them about every 2 years. So basically, Deathly Hallows came out like right before the film came out, like right before they started filming.
Yeah, exactly. So like 2007, I think, was around when they were dropping Deathly Hallows. I remember it being out when I was in middle school, so 2007 sounds about right. But at the same time, 2007 was when they released the 4th movie.
Yeah.
So if you're not 100% following along, and also with the post-production, pre-production, like 4th movie was in production a year and a half ahead. So you're looking at the 6th book hasn't even been released, and Luna Lovegold's importantness doesn't happen really until the 7th book. So why would you add this weird side character who's kind of quirky and doesn't necessarily fit into the vision when you don't realize that she's important yet? It's why I think that you need to start making shows and things like that when your series is already kind of completed.
That would,
or you need to be like, you need to be careful with stuff like that. It's kind of like
well, and to be fair, that was an early example of a multi-part film series. Like Star Wars did it. There's been others that have done it too, but Star Wars is actually a great example of this too. Star Wars needed to be the first one stands alone. The second one ends on a cliffhanger into the 3rd film. But I've always felt Star Wars makes a better TV series than film, because the world doesn't ever get enough world building in the films. There's so much interesting things in this universe. It's such an interesting, unique universe. It's basically like high fantasy meets science fiction in a way that no one really does.
And that's part of the reason that it works so well with, like, you can add all these different projects and stuff like that. That's why the Legend books were so popular.
Yes.
Because when you were reading the books, like, we weren't necessarily as obsessed with canon at the time, but when you're reading the books, you could go, that reasonably could happen. The characters are acting as the characters would. Who's to say that they don't end up in this weird alternate galaxy that has this thing going on?
It's the same reason also why I enjoy like the Mandalorian show, and I really liked Andor. I even liked Obi-Wan that people hated, because it feels like Star Wars. It's the world building of the universe is just fun to me. I just enjoy it.
Yeah, and you get to spend time with the characters, watching the characters be the characters.
Yeah.
The biggest issue a lot of people had with Obi-Wan, I haven't actually seen Obi-Wan, but the biggest issue a lot of people have had with Obi-Wan was they felt that he did not act as he would have. If you think about that. But
no, I get that argument, and I completely dissuade it. It's the same thing I said about this. Like, it made sense. He was broken.
Yeah, but
it also follows well into his. They actually built him much like his Legends character, so it worked for me, and I enjoyed that serialization of these Star Wars characters. I think part of the problem is too, people get tired. Like, oh, I've already seen this person's story. I don't want to see it again. But I will eat up anything Star Wars they give me. I don't even care if it's bad. Just keep giving it to me. I'll watch it. I'm a Star Wars. When it comes to the shows specifically, for some reason, like the newer films, I had struggle with, but the shows, I've enjoyed all of the shows. They just all feel like Star Wars to me, and I feel like it works better as a series than it ever did as films.
Okay, well, we've moved a little bit off topic. Let's redirect it back here.
That's not off topic. What film would you believe would have been multiple parts, or should have been a series? Star Wars. I'm done.
Before we go on a full tangent, we tend to go on tangents with Star Wars. That's why I'm like, let's redirect it back. What's a different movie that you think should have or should not have been multiple parts? Open it up with that, or redirect it with that.
What movies should not have been multiple parts, you mean?
Yeah, unless you have another one that you think should have been multiple parts. Maybe one that wasn't based off of a book.
I was actually trying to think of some specifically that were like unique, but the problem is all the ones that I've seen, I haven't watched Rebel Moon yet, so I don't know how that one fits in multiple parts. It's very Star Wars-esque, or Dune-esque.
Well, it's supposed to be kind of Star Wars mixed with
But
Dune.
most of the ones I can mention are ones that have been since made into multiple parts now because they realized their mistake. Dune, the first Dune was made as a single film. It doesn't work. Then they did it as a miniseries, much better. They did it as a 2-part film, significantly better than the original film that was done when it was done as one movie. They kind of learned pretty quickly that that doesn't work. So there's not a lot I can think of that were films that should have been multiple parts that haven't already now been fixed to be done so. Off the top of my head. Ones that shouldn't have, though, Hobbit should have been 2 films, not 3.
Okay. So still multiple parts, just not as many parts.
Yeah, it should have been less parts.
Okay.
I think the Lord of the Rings trilogy worked well. It could have been more parts. And then I think one of the greatest mistakes they ever made was making the last Divergent film a 2-parter.
I haven't actually seen that.
They must have realized it because they never made the second part.
I don't think they realized it. I think that what happened is that the teen dystopian craze had died.
That was part of it, but the thing was they was straight a money grab. The Divergent series is a young adult fiction series, much like Hunger Games.
Yeah.
Everything that happens was in the movie. They get it all in there. There's not a lot to it. There was no reason to make Allegiant a 2-part film. In fact, Divergent, the first one, they actually extended a little bit because they actually had to add more to make it a full film because the book didn't have enough content. The second one did okay, but they made Allegiant Part 1. I was like, Allegiant is literally them attacking a fortress and they made it a 2-part film. It'd be like making the siege on Minas Tirith in the third Lord of the Rings film its own movie separate from the rest of the Return of the King. Where you just take a whole battle and a battle that's at the end of the film and make it a separate movie. Which is kind of what they did with The Hobbit. The Battle of 5 Armies is like its own movie. It was like that's the last, like the second to last chapter in the book, and you're making a whole film in the last 2 chapters of the book. Like, are you insane? Those are ones that were just weird to me. I don't know why those were done that way. I don't think that there was one other one actually that used to bother me a lot that was a 2-parter that I didn't understand why it needed to be one, but now I've lost it. I think I got too sidetracked. But
I think Mockingjay didn't have to be 2 parts. I haven't read the books. But
no,
watching the
no, it
movies,
did not.
The second part of Mockingjay it's either the first or the second part is one of the most boring films.
The first one is he's the end of the first one where he's just reading off in the background like the things that the President Snow did to get to power. And it's like nothing's happening. He's just reading this off, and it's boring. Yeah, that film did not have to be 2 parts.
Yeah,
straight up did not need it. Straight up a money grab. Oh, we gotta make this. We gotta make more money off this series.
Well, because Harry Potter just did it to great success, and so they were like, yes!
Harry Potter made sense in a way because yes, the 7th book made sense to split in 2.
Well, and it
made sense to be 2 movies. I just think they picked the wrong stuff to make it. It could have been 2 films. They just still made it extended and boring. Also, earlier films should have been 2 as well.
Well, and the thing is that
they just weirdly waited till the last one to do it.
It was kind of a cash grab too, and the thing is that it's like part of the thing that was frustrating about it was they made it into a big deal because it was the cinematic event. It was bigger than the Avengers if you think about it. Because it was the end of Harry Potter. They were like, we'll never make another Harry Potter movie ever again. So they made it into like the big deal where they're like, we need to split it into 2 parts so that way people can be at this hype for longer.
So that was something they said about the Lord of the Rings too. When Peter Jackson did the Lord of the Rings, they kind of wanted it to be the peak version of the film.
Yeah.
Where we're never going to make this again. Let's make it really good because it's such an iconic long lore piece of lore. It's hard. It's something you can only do like once in a heart. Like they're doing, what is it? Nosferatu.
Yeah.
Again, 100 years after the original film. There are just some films that are so iconic you can't do them for a long time if you're going to redo them at all. And that is Lord of the Rings, stuff like that is like that. So I get you kind of want to get the most out of it. I kind of understand, making it more parts just because you really want to get it what you want out of it. But that argument falls flat when halfway through your series you could have done that to great success as well, and you didn't. It also would have given them more time for the book series to finish, to catch up. They kind of rushed it along too much. I think that's a problem that you have when you do these multi-part series, especially based off books, is you make too many parts where you shouldn't, or you don't make enough parts where you should. There needs to be more balance. And honestly, I hate to say it, but I think too many of them would just make better TV series. You actually had a point on here, like, when should a multi-part movie just be made into a TV series? Like 98% of the time. It's just TV shows can do what books can do. If you're going to adapt a book that has too much for a film, make it a movie, make it a TV series instead.
Yeah.
I think it just works better that way. Well, another one actually I was going to say was Serenity, because I watched Serenity before I knew Firefly was a series. And I watched the films like, this would make a great series. I was like, oh, it is.
It's literally a wrap-up of
That was a wrap-up of a
season.
series I'd never seen. And it does a really good job of like putting the characters together. You don't have to know any of them and enjoy. I enjoyed the film. I was like, well, this is really cool. It made sense. I got it. I was like, there's a series? Oh, I didn't realize this was a wrap-up. So that's kind of the opposite, where it's like I realized that was already, this will make a great series. Oh, it was.
Yeah.
Buffy.
The movie?
It was a movie, and it became a television series, a much better television series than the film was.
Well, because the original creator had control of the television series.
Yes.
Whereas the movie was, he lost creative control over it with the studio, I think is what happened. That's why they made Buffy the TV series, and why they're so starkly different is because Josh Whedon literally was like, no, this is actually what Buffy's supposed to be. You wanted a preppy teen comedy movie.
I think it's
it's
another thing
drama.
too that's a good discussion point, is that a lot of times things are made into film and studios like shred it for a film to make it work in a film audience, when it's a lot easier to keep to the source material when you make a series.
That's true. I think that the majority of books make
Books,
better
video
TV
games.
series. Yeah.
I think the adaptations that make good movies are comic books, because they have a lot of good, strong standalone stories.
Yeah.
That's, I think, why comic book films do well, and while with multiple parts they can survive. Like, we're on the fourth Captain America movie coming up. You can do that with superhero films. I think it's harder to do with other things, especially books.
Well,
You
because
put these series together and you realize, oh, this does not work as a film. We cut out half of the content to make this fit.
because it's a different style of writing.
Yeah.
Like I've written both. Well, I haven't finished a novel, but I've written the majority of novels, but I have written lots of comic books. It's a lot easier to make a movie, I would say, off of a comic book, because a comic book you have to wrap up. I think the average run is 20 pages. You only have 20 pages, and most of it is actually visual and not even dialogue.
Right.
So it's a lot shorter. It's a lot curter. It's a lot different type of writing, and it's a self-contained story within itself. A novel, on the other hand, you have to let breathe. You have to establish everything out. You're in it for the long haul.
Right. Which is why novels just
writing.
make better television series than every one of the novel series that I saw made into a TV series was way better than the movie counterpart.
Yeah.
At least, actually, no, I did actually just think of three films that should have been better series that I don't think ever were made. One is Spiderweb Chronicles. They did the first one as a film, and that just never went anywhere.
Yeah.
What's her name's Home for Peculiar Children? Mrs. Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children would have made a wonderful series. They made a single film. It cuts a lot of the characters out, and it doesn't go anywhere. And then another one actually was Aragon. Was made into a film, and to make it filmy, they kind of upped the ante. But That's another thing about a series that you can do. A series can take its time. It can slow burn, and it works. When you make a film, it's tough sometimes. You make a film out of it, and you have to shove so much in there. People want kind of, I don't say they want action, but they want to get to the point faster. A series could take 3 or 4 episodes to get there, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
If you have an action-packed, like, a good example of that on the other end, like something that makes a good film that wouldn't necessarily make a good series, would be something like Doom. The Doom movie was bad, but that's because it was a bad adaptation. But it would make a better film than a series. Because it's just
Doom?
Yeah, Doom. Doom.
Okay.
Because Doom is just a dude blowing up demons. Like, it's not it's not that deep. It would be a horrible show. Like, what would you milk for 8 episodes of a series? It'd be insane. There are certain things that make sense to be single part films.
Yeah, I think that a lot of video games you can kind
A lot of video game adaptations would work as single films. But there are some that would make a better series. Last of Us made way more sense as a series than a film.
Well,
You would never get all of that into a film.
Well, because it's a continuous narrative.
Yes. Halo, better series. The series is a little rough. That's because it's a poor adaptation, but not because it's better as a series, because there's just so much lore.
Yeah.
A film would be tough to get all that lore in there. You just suffer trying to make that.
Well, and it's also a war. Like, wars, you kind of have to let air out if you're going to encompass the entire war. Like, consider Band of Brothers, The Pacific, Masters of the Air. Those books are not really that long. Most of them are from books.
Also, they're like specific battles or instances in a massive war. It's the difference between like a single person's narrative in the Battle of the Bulge and the entire battle, let alone the entire war.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, if you were trying to make a movie about World War II, that'd be impossible.
Right.
But it's hundreds of individual war films set in World War II works because they're individual story elements. That if you wanted to do World War II as a series, you'd have to be a very long serial or a multi-part film, which is kind of what they've done. It's just lots of different films about the war from different angles.
Well, yeah.
Is in a way kind of multi-part series. They've just redone every battle and fight and background character that's happened in World War II.
Well, yeah, I forget the figure. We actually did a whole episode, actually, now that I think about it, on World War II. Movies, TV shows, and stuff like that, why we continue to go back to World War II. What was the figure? It was like, you would have to watch continuous without sleeping, what was it, 1 year? 2 years?
No, it was like a ridiculous amount, I think.
I think
like
it was
30 years or something, like continuously.
I think it was, well,
just see like every war film that had ever been made. And that was just film. Like, we did just the films.
Yeah.
And then, like, every World War II film back to back was like a ridiculous amount.
It was, I don't know if it was like 30, but it was was it 2 or 3 years?
I can't remember, but they're doing the same thing with like Star Wars and Star Trek, and they're starting like, hey, what about that background stormtrooper that we saw in episode 1? What's his story? And Star Trek, they're like, hey, 7 of 9, like what's she doing after? You know, they're just starting to melt characters that we know, which, I mean, I don't have a problem with as long as the stories are good. But I'd like to see more. There's just so many good, unique stories out there that I think would make really good multi-part films or series that just aren't being tapped.
Well, I mean, moving on then into that, are there any film premises or ideas that you think would work well as a multi-part film? Not, and I'm being,
a lot of them have been done.
I'm being specific with film, by the way.
A lot of them have been done. So Transformers is a good example. It's we're at like 9th or 10th film because it's just robots fighting each other. Like, it's just kind of a fun premise.
Yeah.
That makes a really good multi-part series. But I don't think they've done it to its. I think they do better with it. One I'd really like to see is Ninja Turtles. Ninja Turtles was done a 3-part series of live action back in the 80s, early 90s. And since then, they've never been able to do it. They had that other live action that had 2. It was a little rough. but they just keep rebooting it. It never gets to have its moment. Transformers has got to have like 12 movies in the same universe now. It's like, hey, let me have my like 4 Ninja Turtle movies anthology, because they have so many comic and animated stories that have been done that I'd love to see in live action film. They just keep redoing the same ones. The original ones did Shredder to death, and it was never done really well. The newer ones did Shredder and Kang, but that's it. The Mutant Mayhem one was the first one that was like a lot of fun because it was just good, crazy fun. It felt like Ninja Turtles. I'd love to see them do like 3 or 4 films where they get like Casey Jones in there and get it to a point where April becomes a ninja as well, because that's an important part of the comics, and Kurai becomes an important member. They never get to get it there. They always get cut off before they get to where they want to go. It's just sad. I'd love to see Ninja Turtles actually get a multi-part film series that is actually continuation of the characters that works. That's been a sore spot for me for a long time that I'd love, that I think would work really well too if they could just make it right. Mutant Mayhem gives me a lot of hope because it was really good, and I'd love to see more. The only thing about it I didn't like was the animation of the humans was a little weird, but that's it. Yeah. I'd love to see more of that. And then another big one that I think would make a really good multi-part film series specifically, and not necessary television. I'd like to see more of the Lord of the Rings extra lore done. They've kind of done this with Star Wars, where they did like, Rogue One, and they did like other stories in the universe. I'd like to see that with Lord of the Rings. There's a lot of fun, like really great side stories that they mention in poems and stories in the main books, as well as the side stories that would make a great standalone film. That's just in that universe. Like just make a film where it's that one. There's one that's of the Rangers before they kind of became obscure. It's a short story and a poem, but it make a great film, and it's their last stand against the King of Agmar, the King of the Wraiths. They go against him. That would be a great just standalone film. They all die in the end. It ends tragically, but it exists, and it's like but the story ends with a hopeful note because they help, because of their sacrifice, Frodo and their journey later on was more successful. Like those kind of things. You can take like great stories and you can make these like multi-part series where you take characters from existing lore and throw them up there. They did do kind of like Lord of the Rings television series, which is doing some of the second age of Lord of the Rings, but it's like all original and doesn't really take anything from the source material. That would work as films, I think, because it's just a bunch of standalone films that are an anthology, like a series that all connect together but aren't directly related. Kind of like Rogue One. Standalone film in that universe, that would be a great one. Those are 2 for me.
Well, I mean, both of what you described is just a series of films, not necessarily a multi-part film.
Well, the first one would be the Ninja Turtle one straight up. I want to see a 4-part. Like, I want to see them like fight a villain, and then the villain, it turns out they have to travel through time. Like it continues into the next one, like into the Spider-Verse.
Okay.
Into the Spider-Verse, where it goes directly into the next film. We watched the no, what's the first one? Enter
Across the Spider-Verse.
Enter the Spider-Verse, Cross the Spider-Verse, the second one. Second one ends without it being finished. I want to see that in a Ninja Turtles film. That's what I mean.
Yeah.
I'd like to see them like do one like they did the Mutant Mayhem. I'd like to see the next one, like them fighting Shredder, and then at the end of the film, it's not wrapping up, and Kang shows up, and it's still going. Or Krang, I mean. Like, that's what I mean. I want to see that continue into a multi-part film where they're fighting a villain over a series of films.
Yeah, that could work.
Not just sequels, not an anthology of films. I mean a 2 or 3 part film where it's the Turtles fighting a villain that grows in scope. The Lord of the Rings one, yeah, but The reason I mentioned that is because there are a lot of those stories that would make good 2-part films. If they want to milk the crap out of Lord of the Rings, there's so much content there. They're not touching it. I don't understand why. They made up new stuff instead of touching the thousands of This is like when it's just like when Disney took over Star Wars and threw the Legends out and said, we don't have any material. We're going to start over again. We have nothing to go on. It's like, you have all of this. That's another one too. The Legends books in Star Wars have tons of 3 and 4-part book series that would make great little multi-part films that they just threw away. It's kind of a weird choice to make.
Yeah, because a lot of those books actually do lead right into the next one.
Yes. Well, some of them are trilogies. There's the Heir to the Empire trilogy. There's the Young Jedi Knight. There's the New Jedi Order trilogy. Not the New Jedi Order. The New Jedi Order is a whole anthology, but these are independent series. There's the Corellian trilogy. There's the tons of these.
Courtship of Princess Leia, like that. That leads into
that
like
ties
another
into the Heir to the Empire books. So it's that, and then the Heir to the Empire. Yeah, that's like almost they call it the qualogy, but it runs right into that. Those would have been films you could have done, or it could still do some of them, but I think that we've lost that now.
Well, we've kind of lost the ability because it wouldn't feel right to animate or to recast like an iconic character like Princess Leia.
You just animate them. You just do CGI versions of them like they did in the Clone Wars and those series. Like, you just animate them. Or Rebels. In Rebels, Luke shows up in Rebels. You can do that. You can do animation of the characters. Then you can let them live on. It's the same way they were able to have Anakin. They had him played by a different voice actor than the actor who played him in the films. And you can do that kind of stuff. You can do films that way too. I know it's kind of tough and stuff, but it's just kind of like, that's what I'd like to see. I'd like to see them use these characters more in these stories that have been done, or even original stories, But yeah, I think that's all I got. The Dune, like Children of Doom, would make a good 2-part series too. Almost all the Doom books could be done in 2 parts.
Yeah, I think that there's plenty of material there. Some things I think that would work well for a 2-part series. I don't necessarily have like a specific story idea necessarily, but I think one that could work really well would be one that has like a massive tonal shift, and then you go into the next part.
Where like a horror film becomes like a silly happy film suddenly, or like
no, nothing like that. What I mean is like the idea I pitched earlier, maybe like you have you're following a TV crew around that's part of a Ghost Hunters thing. They're doing a Ghost Hunter hunt, and then literally the last part, like right before the film ends, oh yeah, BT Dubs is not a ghost; it's literally like Cthulhu. And then
I would like to see more multi-part genre mixing. So something that I've got, Marvel has done this really well, and I'd like to see other people besides Marvel do this, where they take characters and make a different genres in series. So you take, for example, the Ant-Man trilogy of films. The first one is like a heist film. The second one is like a redemption film, and the third one is a straight up sci-fi horror, like dystopian nightmare. Like it's like there were 3 completely different genres, but these films are a series. The characters get right into the next films. I'd like to see that done with other properties, with unique films and stuff, where you take characters and put them out of their element, and you can do that in series, like multi-part films. I'm trying to think of one that's not an adaptation, because I mean, obviously there's original stuff, but Rebel Moon is doing that, by being original and multi-part. So maybe more people can do stuff like that.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah. I guess we are out of time here, so we'll go ahead and we'll close this out. Thanks so much for listening to this episode where we discussed multi-part movies and a little bit about TV series and such like that. We hope you enjoyed it. Please like this video. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing. And we will see you guys in the next one.